Good evening, everyone. Rein us in. Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, February 22nd, and we are here for our first of two reviews of the budget. We'll get started tonight and review more on Saturday. Before we can begin, can we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. So we are looking forward to looking at an overview of the budget as well as covering some sections to get us started tonight. Thank you so much to all of our members of the staff and administration who are here tonight joining us. We appreciate you being here, and we'll just get started with some board announcements. Anyone have any announcements?
I had the pleasure of going over to the Katona Library to visit the 41st Annual Youth Artists Exhibit, Young Artists Exhibit, and I want to congratulate 9 John Jay High School students and Mrs. Lowe and Mrs. Stockfield for really spectacular artwork, and I hope everybody will have an opportunity to see it. It's there through early March, and really just illuminating artwork from students around the region. I think their work expresses a variety of issues that they're confronting, ranging from personal issues to climate change and some political issues, really just very moving portrayals. So hope people will get a chance to go over, and congratulations to our students.
Yeah. Okay. We do have board committee reports on the agenda. I'm not sure if between last meeting and this meeting there were any committee meetings of any kind. I know we have some committee meetings coming up. So unless anyone has anything to report.
I think the only committee report was going to be the discussion of LES.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
7.01.
So I've heard from Lorraine and Marjorie that they're interested in serving on the committee. Sorry, remind me. I literally talked about this half an hour ago. Express their opinion. I would also like to be on the committee. We talked about there being 3 board members on the committee. I don't know if everyone would be okay with Marjorie, Lorraine, and I serving, if that works. I know we talked about having someone from the finance committee. I'm happy to serve both roles. If I know, Rory, you and I had sort of talked about whether you would be on the committee. It's completely.
That's fine if others are interested. I just thought that there was good carryover. I chaired the finance committee that looked into LES, and so I have quite a bit of knowledge and background. But if we have 3 committee members already from the board, that's fine.
You sure?
I'm sure.
Okay. So, and I might be willing to switch with you, but so. We have our 3 committee members. I know Kim sent out another notice for any community members. We did talk about having up to 6 community members on that committee. So we'd be happy to have community members join us. And, please send your resume and letter of interest so that we know that you're interested in being on the committee. And then we'll let the community know when we start meeting. Okay. Great.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right. So we're up to the presentation for tonight, which is our first presentation of the superintendent's proposed 2024-25 budget. Just a little bit of overview in terms of what we're doing tonight and what to expect in the days and weeks, potentially weeks to come. Tonight, as Julia mentioned, we're going to give you an overview of the entire budget through the slides that we're going to show you here on the screen tonight. This will give you a sense of our broad thinking as well as the precise numbers that make up the proposed budget for the coming year. A lot of thought and preparation has already gone into this. As you'll see in the slides, we're going to show you the process that we go through. I'll do some talking at the beginning, and then Neil will do some talking about staffing, and then Lisa will do a lot of talking about the numbers. Those are the three folks you'll hear from through this first part, bless you, of the presentation tonight. Your questions are very, very important to us as we begin this process and throughout the process. So we ask that as we're going through the slides, we ask board members, please make note of any questions that you might have. I will ask that you hold your questions until the end, and then we'll be happy to go back to any slides at all throughout the presentation and respond. That's really what we want to be doing tonight and in the days ahead. Once we've completed the slide portion of tonight and we've spoken about whatever questions and thoughts there might be, then we actually begin the line-by-line process of going through the entire budget. We're going to start that process tonight with our Director of Transportation, Nora Beltran, who's with us here in the audience. Welcome, Nora. Also, welcome to a number of our other administrative colleagues who are in the audience with us tonight. And thank you to all of you and to all of our colleagues, as well as teaching colleagues throughout the district who helped in putting this budget together. We're very excited to present this budget to you tonight. We think it supports all of the terrific programming in our schools, as I think our board is anticipating since the January budget conditions presentation. This is a challenging year in which to develop this budget. So I'm really super proud of the work, in particular that Lisa Herlihy and all the folks in the business office who've worked so hard on this have done, and Neil and his folks in the HR office, and thinking about the staffing. And again, our priority has been on supporting all of the great programs that are available to our students in the district, making sure that we put students first, think about what's best for them, but also, and you're going to hear a lot more about this, be fiscally responsible to our community in what are challenging times, both for the development of the budget and for the world as a whole. So without further ado, I'm going to start working my way through the slides, and then towards the end, we'd be happy to come to your questions. So we always start by reminding a little bit about what drives the budgeting process, and that is our commitment to the best possible education. Our learning commitment remains at the heart of all that we try to do in our classrooms, creating spaces for our students that are relevant and engaging and active, and that does drive our thinking about what's in the budget. Also very important to our thinking of our own board's goals, both the leadership goal and the fiscal goal, which will be up there second. And I just wanted to call out here again, we so much appreciate the board's support for our work around the learning commitment. And also, though, there's language in this leadership slide about listening to multiple perspectives, being a presence within the community, assuming good intent. I want to just call out some of those things because that's all present in this budgeting process also. I think we're all want to acknowledge we're working very hard here towards what we believe are best ends for our students, and we appreciate the spirit in which our board always operates in that regard. And then the next slide, obviously very important to the budget process, the fiscal stewardship, the board's goal. And in the middle bullet point, the board asks us to bring a budget for your consideration that does not exceed the tax cap. And this budget, in fact, does come in just below the New York State mandated tax cap. And that makes me think about one other thing I wanted to say at the beginning in terms of the process that we're going to go through. So tonight, you're hearing about the superintendent's proposed budget. You're going to continue to hear about that through the day on Saturday. And then depending on the questions that you have at the end of Saturday, you may hear about the superintendent's budget 2 or 3 more times at future meetings after that, with our goal being to get to a point, some point in either late March or early April, where the board is prepared to adopt this budget, at which point it becomes the board's adopted budget. And there's several more rounds of consideration and opportunity to present that budget in our schools through the help and support of our PTOs, to the entire community in mid-May. And then it's the Board of Education's adopted budget that the community has the opportunity to vote on in May. So on May 21st. So that's the process that we're beginning tonight. So I've spoken a little bit about the board's goals that are very important to us. And here's that slide that outlines our budget development process. It's a very lengthy process. It's truly a year-round process that really begins almost the moment the community votes on the previous budget. But in earnest, it does begin the beginning of the school year with the board developing its goals. In the November and December timeframe, our department leaders, our school leaders, are all working about, and thinking through what they think their needs will be for the coming year, which is not an easy task in November or December of a current school year to be thinking about a year that's so many months away, but that's what we asked them to do. And then in December and January, those leaders, again, building leaders, department leaders, come before what we call our central office review team to present their proposals to us. We think about what's possible. They come with all their best ideas and best thinking about what's going to make the experience even stronger for students. And then we start to think about the conditions in which we're living at the moment and what we can manage and what we can bring before the board. In January of this year, it was a little bit later than usual. We did our budget conditions presentation. Even though it was a little later than usual, it still came ahead of the governor's proposed budget, which you'll hear a little bit more about later on, and which is having some impact on what we're proposing to you tonight. New York State's budget is not yet finalized and probably won't be finalized until close to the conclusion of our own process here. And so then we come to you tonight once we have fully fleshed out and developed what we think is a responsible and very appropriate budget for our students and to support all the great things that happen in our schools. And now we start to look at some of the numbers. So enrollment is a significant driver of the budget. And as the board knows well and our community knows, Katona-Lewisboro did experience a fairly significant drop in enrollment over the span of about a decade. In more recent years, and that's the area circled in red, the enrollment has flattened a little bit, but I do want to point out that when we were here a year ago, and we were showing you the 22-23 number, and 23-24 was projected, it was projected to be a slight increase. And now you're seeing the actual number for 23-24, and you can see it's actually a small decrease from the prior year. So you're going to hear this theme a little bit throughout the evening. We're now looking, the only number that's not an actual number on this chart is next year's projected total enrollment of 2,809 students. That's a projection, just like when we were here last year. This year's number was a projection, and you can see that this number, which comes from our demographer, who uses historical data and trends, as well as what he knows about current information in the district to make this projection. And he's again projecting a very slight, relatively slight increase for overall enrollment next year. And only time will tell whether that proves to be an accurate projection, or like this year, do we experience a little bit more of a decline? We'll see as time goes on. But you can see, I think, over about a 5-year period now that what was a steep decline is now relatively shallow. Going to the next slide, this is more about enrollment, just broken out a little bit differently, but I do want to point something out here. So now you're seeing these are the same years, the same trends, but now broken out by school level. And what we were showing here in the last couple of years, if you look just at the elementary column, and you look about halfway down the elementary column to the 2019-20 school year, you see we reached a number of 1209, and then the number started to tick up a little bit each year. And we saw that trend all the way through last year with the numbers ticking up. And then again, when we were here last year and the last actual number was 1238, this year for the 23-24 year, the demographer was again projecting an increase to 1266 was, I think, the number we showed you on the slide last year. And you can see that the actual elementary enrollment for the current year as of October, when we take these numbers, is 1231. So that projected increase didn't quite pan out. The middle school, high school numbers tend to be a little bit more accurate because there's a little bit less change as the students get older in the districts. Those numbers are closer to what was projected. So again, and the other thing I wanted to point out, so that what had been a fairly consistent ticking up in the elementary enrollment, this year for the first time we actually see a number going down for the first time in a few years in elementary school, only by 7 students, but still not an increase. For the first time in a few years. Next year, however, again, our demographer is projecting an increase from 1231 to 1250. And you can see what's happening in the other schools. So moving on now, getting close now to talking about what's in the budget itself, and just making the point again that these are the things that drive our thinking that we care a great deal about for our students. The learning commitment at the center of everything we do. That's the classroom experience. and then right around it, those three focus areas of social emotional learning, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and sustainability. We care a great deal about all of these areas, and there's funding in the budget for continued professional learning in those areas, and you're going to hear more about that later. And then in the next slide, we talk about how the budget is shaped, and for a number of years, we've talked about it in these three very broad categories. Enrollment and class size is a very significant driver in the budget. About 81% of the total budget is made up of salaries and benefits that go to employees, and those employees who are here to provide for our students, and the numbers are driven by how many students are enrolled in the district. So there's a very direct correlation between enrollment and class size and the budget that you'll be hearing about tonight. Of course, also important are the programs that we provide our students and the professional learning that our staff do in order to provide the best possible programming that we can. And then maintaining the buildings is very, very important. And that's something that we're going to talk about tonight that you haven't heard about in recent years, which is in light of the bond that passed in 2022, the bond referendum that our community supported and that we're very, very excited about, means that for the first time since I've been in the district, the debt that we're taking on in the budget is actually going up. Throughout my 9 years in the district, debt was either being reduced a little bit or staying pretty level, but now we're taking on some new debt as we prepare to do the construction that was approved under the bond referendum. So, and then always maintaining the facilities to the best of our ability is very important. So next we have this note that we added in this year. It's very important to us in light of some of the challenges that you're going to hear about as we talk through the rest of this budget, that the budget we're proposing maintains all current student programming in what we think is a fiscally responsible manner, and that does come to you under the tax cap. But because you're going to hear about some very significant increases, and as a result, you have to also hear about some decreases, we wanted to be clear from the beginning that those decreases don't reflect cuts to student programming. This budget still supports the same program that which we think is a terrific program, that our students are able to receive in the current school year. Now we're going to start to detail some of those things a little bit with that, and these come in the same order as those earlier drivers that I spoke to. So the first one is enrollment and class size. If you can remember back to last year, there was a lot on this slide because we added quite a number of staff in last year's budget. This year's budget doesn't allow for those kinds of additions. So what you see is one proposed addition of a special education teacher, which is due to increased enrollment in the special class programs in our elementary schools. And then the next position you see added is also a position to support our therapeutic support program. And we're pointing out that this position actually is in existence already and was created out of contingency funds that the board approved in the current year budget, again, due to needs in the elementary school. We've been very fortunate to have therapeutic support program, TSP program, at the high school, the middle school, and the elementary schools for a number of years. This year was the first time that we actually saw need in the K2 area, and so we created a K2 classroom in addition to the existing 3-5 classroom. So, and we project continued need in that area. So we're now asking that a position that was supported through contingency funds now be supported in the actual budget itself. Those are the only two staffing increases you're going to see, and later on in the budget presentation, you're going to see some reductions that balance out those two additions. And then we are asking, once again, and the board has been generous enough to support 4 contingency positions for a number of years. And what I want to say this year that's a little bit different than in prior years is because of the work that we've done to bring you the budget in the manner that you're going to see it tonight, we've looked very, very closely at all lines, salary lines, all lines, to get them where we can so that they support current staffing, but don't do anything above and beyond that. And as a result, we're feeling, I would say, a little bit more anxious about potential enrollment fluctuations than we were in prior years, and thinking that, you know, if need arises, we're going to need those contingency positions. Let me say a little bit more about that while I'm on the topic. You're going to see just a little bit later, last year, for example, in kindergarten, you know what, maybe I'm going to hold that. I'm going to hold that thought till I get to the kindergarten slide. It'll make more sense then. So, but I'm going to come back to those contingency positions. Okay, the next slide stays on the topic of school program professional learning. The board recently heard a very thorough science presentation, and you see here that this budget supports now implementation of the New York State Science Learning Standards. The board and community heard a lot about how much more robust those standards are, and a new course pathway that will come online next year in the 8th grade at John Jay Middle School, and then we hope the following year in the 9th grade at the high school. And this budget supports our ability to do that. It also supports continued professional learning in those focus areas that I've mentioned, DEIB, SEL, and sustainability, continues to support instructional enhancements in literacy and mathematics, and it supports the innovation cohort. This is our 4th innovation cohort going into its 2nd year in the district. So there's funding for all of those things. This is a slide that talks also about program and professional learning, but talks about it in terms of positions. And again, last year, you would have seen a lot more reflected here. This year, what's new really is the first bullet and the last bullet. The first bullet, we are asking for 3 additional monitor positions. These are part-time positions. These are monitors who would ride buses with our students. We are experiencing some challenges on the buses, particularly at the elementary level. And our principals and others have thought, and we agree with them, that this could be a very helpful addition. So it's a request for 3 part-time monitor positions who would help to ride the buses and support our students as they come to school and go home each day. The next 2 bullet points are really just calling out things that are already in the budget, although in that second bullet point where we say continued support for 1 ENL teacher at each school, we've talked in previous years about the increase in the ENL population that's occurred in our district and really in all communities in our region. And last year, when we came to the board, we actually asked you for a 6th position in ENL because we were anticipating significantly more enrollment. We also know that the ENL population is a more fluid population in our schools and again regionally. And the anticipated enrollment didn't materialize to the extent that we thought it would. So this year we're coming to you and letting you know that we're now proposing to remove that 6th ENL position from the budget. That still leaves us with 1 ENL teacher at each school. We think that's a very appropriate staffing for what we anticipate to be the level of need. So we just wanted to call out continued support for 1 ENL teacher at each school, but it's actually a reduction that you'll see later on. Next bullet point, similarly, although there's no reduction here, but last year we came to you and proposed to students, that's the wrong word. It should say, oh no, I'm sorry, it's correct. Substance abuse counselor at John Jay High School. And again, we thank the board for supporting and the community for supporting that position in this year's budget. It was only relatively recently that the agency was actually able to fill that position. We're very glad that that person is here now. I think she started with us about in November. And has begun to see students here at the high school. So that continues to be supported in the proposed budget. And then finally, and the board has heard about this previously also, our athletics department is happy to support a new women's flag football program that's actually starting now this spring season. And we were able to find the money in the current budget to support the coaching positions. But for next year, we're asking for those 2 positions to be added. And again, that's really it in terms of new positions. So the first bullet point and the last are the things that are new. And then moving on to infrastructure, and I've really already mentioned the first bullet point. So again, for the first time, we're increasing some debt payments as a result of the October 22 approved bond referendum. And then you're going to hear more about this later on also when we look at the school enrollment. The special class program, which I've already mentioned once, is moving from Increase Miller to Meadow Pond in the coming year, and there are some infrastructure needs to update some of the special ed classrooms at Meadow Pond as a result. That's supported by this budget. And also the board has previously heard about an inclusive playground to be built at John Jay Middle School. We're excited that that's moving forward, and we do anticipate that will be constructed in the coming year. So we're happy to have support for that in the budget, as well as the typical ongoing maintenance and repair in all of our schools. So now the next slide is going to finally show the numbers themselves. And these are the very large summary numbers of the budget, which we're going to detail more as we go forward. So now what you're seeing here is on the top line, the current budget, $119,988,980. That's this year's 23-24 approved budget. Superintendent's proposed budget for next year is up to $124,318,762. That's an increase of $4,329,762. That's a percentage increase, budget to budget, of 3.61%. And it's a tax levy increase of 3.4%. The asterisk there next to the tax levy down below tells us that that increase, even though it's above 2, which we know some people still think is the tax levy increase, Lisa will explain very well to us later, but that's not the case. And 3.4% is in fact below the New York State tax cap limit, as the board requested that it should be. So later on, we're going to hear a lot more about what adds up to those numbers. But now we're going to go into some more detail about enrollment. So we start by showing the class size parameters that have been in place since before I arrived in the district and have governed our work ever since. You can see the goal number, the number that we kind of aim to achieve in each class, and we use the word range. We could replace that number with the maximum, the word maximum. So in K2, it's from 20 to 25, goal to maximum. In third grade, it's a standalone grade, 25, 28. Then really from there on, 4th through 12th grade, it's 25 to 30, with some exceptions in special areas, industrial art classes and some other special areas such as those. But for the most part, those are the numbers that we work with. So we try to keep those in mind as we move forward. So now we get to that kindergarten slide that I said I would talk about just a few minutes ago. So for quite a number of years, we've pulled kindergarten out of the individual schools. The reason being, kindergarten, for obvious reasons, is the most difficult grade for our demographer to project and for anyone to project, because the students are not yet with us. And it can be a family's personal decision as to whether or not they're going to enroll their child in a given year or not. And so it is hard to project those numbers. Last year, on the same slide, the staffing in both boxes was 11. Because in the prior school year, we had 11 sections of kindergarten, and we were projecting 11 for the current school year. As I mentioned earlier, the demographer's numbers indicated need for 11. When the actual numbers came to fruition by late summer, we realized we don't have need for 11 sections. So we pulled one section back, we reduced it to 10. You can see there the October numbers in kindergarten were 174. 10 was a very comfortable number for us, resulting in that average class size you see of 17.4 across the district. So for the coming year, you can see that again, our demographer is projecting a number that's actually fairly similar to what was last year's projection. This time it's 204. We're not projecting 11 this time like we did last year. We're projecting 10. And this is what I was trying to say earlier about where we were a little bit more nervous about those, or we're a little bit more reliant perhaps on those contingency positions should the numbers either meet or exceed the demographer's numbers in this case. We do, though, want to call out also, though, that 204 on this slide includes those incoming kindergartners who we anticipate going into a special class kindergarten. So we're right, those decisions haven't all been finalized yet by CSE, so they're not formal yet, but we do anticipate that even if that demographer number proves to be accurate, we think the number will be below 200. So 10 sections would give us an average class size below 20, which is below the board's goal. We're very comfortable with that. So our intention is to leave it as proposed to you for 10 sections in kindergarten for next year. So now we start to look at the individual schools, and I think I started to mention and maybe cut myself off. For a number of years, we've pulled kindergarten out of the individual schools because it's hard to project it. It's even harder to project it if you try to break it out by school. So we have found it's generally a little bit more accurate if we look at it as a district-wide number rather than trying to look at it by school. So now we go to each of the individual schools, and obviously the total enrollment at the bottom doesn't include the kindergarten. So the schools look a little bit smaller than they actually are. And again, what I'm going to say here is that you're seeing in the first columns, October 23, that's Beds Day. That's when we report our enrollment data to the state of New York. So we've always used that number for sake of consistent comparisons. And then the projected numbers are, again, those numbers that our demographer gives us based on historical trends. And so what you'll see is that in some cases, historically, numbers have trended up as students have moved from one grade to another. And in some cases, historically, they've trended down. So the demographer's projections reflect those trends. Again, whether they prove to be entirely accurate or not remains to be seen. What you'll see at all three elementary schools next year is that the staffing remains the same as each grade moves on to the next grade. So if there's 4 sections in this slide, for example, in the first grade at Increase Miller, as those first graders become second graders, the same 4 sections are moving with them. I point that out because that's not always true. There are some years where enrollment change in either direction causes us to either add a section or take away a section. But in this, the way the numbers are falling this year, all the numbers are staying the same. On the increase slide at the bottom, you're seeing the drop in total from 21 to 19 because the 2 special class sections are being moved out for next year and they're going to show up in Meadow Pond. But otherwise, you can see we're comfortable with the numbers, the average class size numbers from 1st through 5th grade that you see on the right-hand side there. Increase Miller. Moving on to Katona, very similar story. Some of the projected numbers from the demographer go up. Some of them may go down a little bit. All the sections in terms of staffing remain the same as they move ahead from year to year. So first grade with 4 sections goes to second grade with 4 sections, et cetera, on down the line. You can see that the totals of sections at the bottom remain the same from this year to next year, and the class size averages remain within goal, or very, very close to goal across the board. So we're comfortable with those projections as they are. Moving on to Meadow Pond, again, very similar story. Here at the bottom, though, you'll see the sections increasing, and this is where not only are the 2 sections coming over from Increase Miller, but I spoke earlier to that 1 additional section, the 1 additional special ed teacher that's in the budget because of increased enrollment in the anticipated increase in enrollment in the special class. But otherwise, you can see the sections are all remaining the same. And again, we're very comfortable with the class size averages. Then we move to the, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't move that slide ahead for the audience. So there's the Meadow Pond slide. My apologies. Again, everything's staying the same with the exception of the special class. And now we move to the middle school. And as we move to the secondary schools, we do always point out that the numbers here, and I actually want to point out one very small error and make clear that we're aware of it. There's a rounding error on the bottom there in 6th grade where we're showing 10 sections and a projected class size of 21. That really should say 20, because if you look up above where there's 204 students in the grade, 20.4 should round down to 20, not round up to 21. So we want to be
with tax.
Well, thank you. Kind of you in particular, Bill, to say that. I appreciate it. But we want to be clear. We recognize it probably should show 20 there to be consistent. But we also call out that once we get into the secondary schools, these are truly averages. They're not necessarily reflective of actual class sizes, whereas the elementary schools numbers are much closer to the numbers you see on the slides. But because of building more complicated schedules and individual choices students might make around the music they take or the world language that they take, some of the class sizes will be higher, some of them may be a little lower, but that's the average that we're looking at. And then as we move to the high school, certainly the same thing there. I would imagine Shina would tell us she might not have any classes that are the size of the ones that are reflected there in the bottom right of the chart, because some of them are certainly considerably larger. And then there are others, specialized electives, that may be smaller. But those are the averages. You see some increased numbers in terms of sections at the high school. I didn't call it out, but the middle school is experiencing an overall decline of about 39 students from this year to the next, whereas the high school is experiencing an increase of about 37 students. So there's some adjusting in sections and a little bit of changing in staffing. And so since I've mentioned that word staffing, I'm going to now turn over to Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, thank you. You want to just progress to, there we go,
Yep.
Staffing changes. Yeah, so thank you, Andrew, and good evening to everyone. It's great to be here. As Andrew mentioned, we have examined the staffing lines and really gone through them to bring a budget that's under the cap. And as you see, we're recommending some reductions to balance out a couple of the increases. And also just the next few slides just represent, I think, a lot of what Andrew has referenced and displayed into numbers here. So Andrew, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Our proposed staffing changes for teaching. As you'll see, we'll start with the asterisk there. This excludes the requests for the four contingency teaching positions that Andrew referenced a little bit earlier. We go back up to the top of that first line for elementary teachers. The change in FTE here is a reduction of 1, and that represents the kindergarten sections. Last year at this time we were projecting 11, and now we're projecting 10. So there in the parentheses, that's for people who don't know, that represents a reduction. If it's not a parentheses, it represents an addition. So for the elementary teachers, we're projecting here a reduction of 1. The next line down, the special education teachers. In the very beginning, Andrew referenced the need for a contingency position to be used for our TSP program at one of our elementary schools. We're now asking that that position be enfolded into the 24-25 budget. For the second of the two special education teachers, that has to do with enrollment and the increased needs of, or I should say the needs driven by IEPs. Based on our projections for adding another special class in special education. ENL, Andrew mentioned as well. This time last year, we were projecting 6 ENL teachers. Right now, we're projecting 5, so that represents a reduction of 1 going forward to 24-25. The last line there, the fractional subject area teaching positions, is a reduction of 1, and that is the components and fractional FTEs within secondary. And as Andrew said, we want to be really careful. That does not represent a person. That just represents an examination of different departments across secondary, and a total reduction of 1. With the subtotal there, overall for staffing changes is a reduction of 1. The next slide is support staff changes. As you'll see here, this is, and Andrew mentioned this earlier, some of the busing and has presented some challenges for us. And so we agree with the elementary staff, elementary principals and APs recommending bus monitors. These are for 3 part-time monitors to support our students to and from school. I just say 3 total, not 3 per school. And finally, you'll see here that the total changes in the summary. We've shown this slide year to year, and so we want to be consistent with what we show and display everyone. But it should be noted that even though the reduction of 1 teaching position and the addition of 3 support staff, it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's really apples to oranges, if you will. 3 support staff does not equal, or 1 support staff does not equal the cost of 1 teacher. So that total there of an addition of 2 is not 2 teachers, but we just wanted to show the numbers as we typically do. And again, as I noted in one of the first slides, this does not include the request for 4 contingency positions.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah. And now to Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And so I'm here tonight to outline the financial plan that supports both the board's fiduciary goals as well as our learning commitment. We're going to go through more budget detail later tonight as well as on Saturday, but I will begin with an overview. As Andrew had mentioned earlier, the proposed budget-to-budget increase is just over $4.3 million, which represents a 3.61% increase. The major drivers of this budget were health insurance at close to $3 million, $2.967 million, followed by our contractual obligations, again approaching $1 million at $967,000 and change. Further, we are increasing our debt due to the approval of the bond projects and those beginning, the bond projects that were approved in 2022. And lastly, our employer contribution to the New York State Teachers Retirement System. In order to deliver a budget below the tax cap or tax levy limit, we reduced budgeted items such as textbooks,
instructional supplies and other supplies. In terms of textbooks, instructional supplies, and materials, not all of the budget lines in these categories were decreased. Rather, this is an aggregate decrease of these areas of the budget overall. The categories listed above with significant reductions total almost $800,000. Again, there are other areas of the budget where we did make reductions, but these were the areas with the largest decreases. As has been done in the past, now we will take a look at the budget and tax levy history. You will see here that I, dropped off the top line, the 2018 line, and added the 24-25 budget lines. So the first column is, or the second column rather, is the budget line. The next column is our net tax levy, which is the total amount of taxes we need to raise through the issuance of taxes. On the following slides, we're going to go into a little more detail about the tax levy as well as tax cap calculations. But here you'll see over the last 6 years of a budget and levy changes, the budget and levy changes of a average levy change of 1.64% and an average budget change of 2.2%. Now we'll take a closer look at tax cap calculations, our tax levy, as well as what goes into our other revenues. As Andrew mentioned earlier, this again is a reminder, there is still that belief that 2% tax cap rate. And in fact, it is 2% or CPI. That is a component of this calculation that we will look at in detail, but it is whatever is lower of the two, but then you add or subtract other variances relative to adjustments, which are attributable to such things such as development in our community, what's happening with our state aid, as well as possible like debt and things like that. So that comes into our calculation. We will look at that. In addition, with the tax cap calculation, if CPI is lower than 2%, actually that allowable growth factor number that gets capped at 2% could be a lower number. This year, the allowable growth factor is capped at 2% because CPI is greater than 2%. And at the time that this factor was set, it was actually 4.12%. And there's another factor that goes into our tax cap calculation. It has to do with the growth of brick and mortar and such in our community, in this community, and that growth factor is 1.0096. So what does our tax cap calculation look like for the 24-25 school year? And before we can really start to talk about the levy, we need to understand, what and how this is calculated. So we begin with the 23-24, our current year, even though it says prior year tax levy, but it's because we're calculating it for the 24-25 school year, but we begin with the 23-24 tax levy, and we start from there. We multiply that tax-based growth factor, which I mentioned before, which is 1.0096%, which actually allows the levy to grow by $984,000. We then adjust for the prior year exclusions by deducting them and from this number, and it's a deduction of $1.6 million. We then multiply this by 2%, which allows the levy to grow by $2 million, a little bit over $2 million. This produces a tax levy limit before exclusions of $103,862,979. We then add back in our estimated debt and capital exclusions, which are for the 24-25 school year, and we actually do deduct out state aid from those numbers to get an exclusion, which results in a maximum allowable tax levy that could increase by $3,649,449. The overall tax levy percent increase allowable under this formula, taking into account these factors, is 3.56%. So again, there is a maximum allowable tax levy of over $106 million. This allowable tax levy is approximately $3.6 million higher than the 23-24 levy, or 3.56% higher. The levy, as already mentioned, we are proposing a tax levy increase of $3,484,909, which is actually $165,000 below the maximum tax levy. The budget presented, because it is below the tax cap, does simply require what is called a simple majority, which is 50% plus one of the voters to pass. And you know, just for informational purposes, if the board were to you know, necessitate a tax levy that was beyond the maximum cap, then you would have to have a 60% majority to pass that. And that's for a budget that was exceeding the tax cap. And this slide, the next slide, shows us how we balance our budget to revenues and how we calculate the actual tax levy. Other sources of revenue indicated in the middle two rows there have a net increase of $844,873, with increases specifically, as we'll see on the next slide, in interest, committed reserves, and state aid. This helps us to balance the revenue side of the budget and offset increases to the tax levy. On the next slide, we will go into a little more detail. A couple of highlights. During the budget development process, we examine all revenue sources. Most revenue streams are projected based on looking at the current year as well as prior year's revenue patterns. We usually start with the governor's projected state aid. And I'd like to point out that our foundation aid under the governor's proposed budget is slated to decrease by $288,290 to be exact. The projected increase in state aid, you will see on this slide, is based on, you'll see on this slide that our projected aid is actually projected to increase, and that is based simply on our expense-based aids. So again, our foundation aid is being decreased, and but based on our expense-based aids, we are projecting as somewhat of an increase in year-to-year aid. So specifically, the district does have minimal, streams of revenue. Our tax levy currently comprises 2.27% of our budget. Our state aid currently comprises 9.06%. And just to back up, our tax levy is 85.27%. The prior year was 85.44%. So it is, pretty close. The state aid was, this current year is for the proposed for next year is 9.06%, whereas it is now 9.2%. Appropriated fund balances and committed reserves we're proposing next year will be 2.18% of the budget, and for the current year it is actually 2.04%. Our county sales tax comprises 1.29%, and currently it's projected at 1.33%, and all other aids comprise 1.57% of the budget, and current projections are at 1.94%. But at this time, all revenues are projected and may be adjusted when new information becomes available. For example, state aid is subject to change pending negotiations in Albany, and as we know, and by law, the state budget is supposed to be approved by April 1, but based on holidays and such, there's not projected that will happen, but who knows? But our state aid, again, as I mentioned earlier, was cut in the governor's executive budget by $288,290. And as you can see, that is the exact proposed increase in our committed reserves. If foundation aid were to be restored and hold or save harmless is upheld, we would decrease the line of the revenue budget and increase the state aid line of the revenue budget. Overall, our tax levy is projected again to increase by 3.4%. as mentioned in the previous slides, which is less than the allowable tax levy increase of 3.56%. The last thing we will talk about is tax rate and rate. The rate is really heavily determined, is really heavily determined and dependent upon assessment values that are all preliminarily assessed values, and they're being modified as we speak. There are different components that they're looking at. I mean, there's, different areas that they're still looking at the 4 towns that are part of our taxing jurisdictions that won't be finalized until later this spring. This slide represents the next slide. Thank you. This slide represents the percent change in tax rates. And again, this says projected tax rates, but this is actually the percent change in tax rates. The tax rate is the amount of money you have to multiply by assessed value of your home in order to generate your taxes. These actual tax rates, there is a chart in the binder in the budget book that is available on board docs that does show the specific tax rates. Since assessments are not final, these are merely estimates. These rates will change based upon changes in the budget and/or changes in assessed values, and are based on assessment values currently available. So right now we are projecting Bedford really is projecting a rate estimate of $109.99, which is down 84 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. Lewisboro's rate is currently estimated to be $232.31, down $13.91 per $1,000 of assessed value. North Salem rate is estimated to go down by $1.65 to 16.22. And Pound Ridge's rate is currently estimated to be $113.39, which is up $2.15 per $1,000 of assessed value. So I just want to thank you, and I will turn it back to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and not just for the presentation tonight and to you and Neil, but for all the work that went into being able to talk through all those numbers tonight. We know it was a lot, so thank you for all of that. So I have this summary slide here to talk about, but I actually want to back up for a minute, if I can, because now that you've heard a sense of the budget, I just want to highlight a few of the things that Lisa said. So if we go back to this slide that showed the increases, it doesn't take a sophisticated mathematician to see that those 4 areas alone, health insurance, the contractually obligated increases, debt, and what we're required to contribute to the teacher's retirement system, if nothing else changed in the budget, we would be busting through the tax cap with those 4 increases. So you know that we've made significant reductions in other areas in order to bring you a budget that's below the tax cap, which is a very appropriate goal that the board presents to us. And our administrators who are here in the room with us, as well as across the district, are very well aware of the places where we've made reductions. And as we go line by line through the budget tonight and in the coming days, you're going to see some increases in areas, but you're also going to see a lot of numbers that go down in a lot of places. And when it comes to next year, our administrators are going to have budget books that have some much lower numbers in them to work with, because there's only certain places when we can make reductions. So if they want to order some new furniture in the next school year, or if there's some new textbooks they want to try and buy, it's going to be much harder for them. We're going to help them by doing some work in the springtime of this year so that we are well prepared. But what we worked very hard to avoid was, again, as I said before, touching the things that we think are most important to our students, and that is our teachers. And so the teaching staff stays the same, the support staff stays the same, and as a result, the student experience, we think, stays the same and only gets better because our staff gets stronger each year with the learning that they do and the experiences that we try to provide. So that's how we tried to develop a budget in this challenging environment that could come in below the cap, given these, particularly the health insurance, given these very significant increases. So just wanted to just touch on that. And then I will say here in the summary slide, I think probably say some of the same things again. We think this is a fiscally responsible budget. It incorporates the debt of the exciting bond project that will happen over the next couple of years, and it is within the levy. We're very mindful of the fact the numbers at the bottom of that summary slide that Lisa showed, where we show the last 6 or 7 years, those percentage increases are larger than we're used to seeing in our community. There's no doubt about that. However, they are within the tax cap that New York State mandates. To some degree, the word victim is too strong here, but I'll use it. We're a victim of the hard work we've done in prior years to keep things as fiscally responsible as we can, and now in a very tough health insurance environment, we have to make some increases in order to maintain the programming that we have. So that's the summary overview. The remaining slides, and I do want to, there's one in particular that I need to speak to because most years we just show you 2 propositions. This year we're showing you 3, and I want to make sure everyone understands why that is. So proposition number 1, this is what the voters will see when they go into the voting booth on May 21st, is about the budget itself. So this is the proposition that allows us to levy the taxes that go towards establishing the budget that we've proposed. Proposition number 2, again, is one that our community is familiar with, where we're not asking for new funding here. We're asking for permission to use funds that exist in the current year budget to purchase some vehicles to replace aging out buses, et cetera, to transport our students. So that's proposition number 2. It's a $450,000 number. That number's been higher in some previous years when we were replacing vehicles, so not quite as much need there this year. But again, the important thing is that's not new money that we're asking for. It's permission to use existing monies in this way. And then the third and new sort of proposition, it looks very much like proposition number 2. So I want to explain the reason for this. 2 years ago, we had a very similar vehicle proposition that was written with specific dollar amounts for each vehicle within the proposition. As everybody knows, the world has experienced very significant delays in many types of purchasing, including the purchasing of large vehicles like school buses. And those delays have also led to very significant cost increases, to the point where we could no longer purchase the buses at the dollar amounts that we had told the voters we were going to purchase them at. And as a result, the way that proposition was written is no longer valid for us to use it in that way. So what proposition number 3 is simply asking, and you can see now we no longer specify the individual cost of each vehicle, we give a total. And the reason for that is so that if there is some fluctuation down the road, we can work with the total and we can still purchase a vehicle. Maybe we won't be able to purchase as many vehicles, but we can still use the money that the voters approve. So this is simply asking permission a second time to use the same money that was approved 2 years ago, but now to use it with a little bit more flexibility. I hope that makes sense. We're going to try to explain that much more succinctly to the voters themselves. And then the remaining slides are the schedule of what's upcoming. So we are here on February 22nd with our first day introduction. We're going to hear in a moment from Nora Beltran. We'll be back again on Saturday. And then we have those dates in March available as needed to go through further revisions if necessary. We look at possible adoption dates when the proposed superintendent's budget might become the board's proposed budget. There's a required by the state of New York public hearing of the budget that has to happen within 2 weeks of the vote itself. So that's to be on May 9th this year, when we again go through the budget, and then the vote itself all day on May 21st of 2024. We thank in advance our PTOs for supporting presentations of the budget to any community members who wish to come and hear more about it. In the middle school on May 13th and in the high school on May 14th, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. Just a reminder of the voting date, May 21st, 2024. And now we do want to hear, and we're going to take careful note of your questions. And if there are some questions we can answer tonight, we'll be happy to do that. And if there are other questions we need to write down and take with us and come back to you on Saturday or at an even later date, we'll be happy to do that. Thank you for your patience in letting us go through this all tonight. And thank you for the questions that we're about to receive. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate everyone's efforts. Thank you to Neil and your work around our staffing, and Lisa around the entire budget, and everyone who's here. I know how hard it is to create a budget and be really thoughtful about centering the budget around our student experience. So we appreciate all the effort and look forward to reviewing all the further detail of the budget. I don't know if anyone has any questions to start with. or if we want to, just general thoughts.
For me, there's really only one line item that's worth really exploring, and that's the question of the health insurance. And so we've gone from, I think it was a little over 19 million to a little over 22 million in total insurance expenses. And I know that there are options, and again, I chaired a committee that looked at health insurance and looked at some of the options, including BOCEs and a couple of others. And it's just curious. I recall that those trend lines sort of zigzagged and they crossed each other. And it was very hard to get a good read on which way any one of them is going.
Yeah.
But you would think that this is a fairly industry standard, like insurance rates ought to be relatively standardized. If they're going up, they should be going up for everybody. If they're going down, they should be going down for like actuarial tables or actuarial tables. So it's really curious that we see such a jump this year in in NISHIP. And I just wonder if it's worth analyzing again what may have happened had we chosen to go with Putnam Northwest or BOCES last year. Like we anticipated it, right? We thought about it last year and the year before that, and we sort of, and now here we are with a massive expense on the budget this year that's really influencing everything else. And is it time to sort of re-engage with that analysis? I mean, did we do that analysis on the Finance Committee this year? And
So that was actually, we talked about at the last meeting that we need to look at it. So, I mean, I think my experience, at least in my professional health insurance, I oversee health insurance where I work, and we also saw a very significant increase this year. I think that's probably being experienced, but we don't know SwissShip, NISHIP, what the variance is there, and we should look at that for sure.
When does that decision have to be made?
Well,
If we were to,
it's
not just a decision.
It's
right? It's a negotiation.
Yeah, okay.
So it's tied into when contracts are negotiated, when they expire, when they get renegotiated. And that's why we look at the trends. You're absolutely right.
there are substantial escrows
Correct.
to get
switching.
into
Yeah.
a new. So if you wanted to move to SwissChip, for example, I think it's about a 3.5 million escrow that you would have to put up to just get into that plan, and then you would have to negotiate. So it's not as simple as just switching, and that's always been one of the barriers to us jumping from one to the other. But yet, here we are with a substantial hit that, I mean, I anticipated it would go up, but that's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's really impacting everything else. I mean, it's barely even worth talking about other line items when you've got one $3 million bogey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I looked at some like national information, and like in 35 states, the health insurance rates went up more than 5%, and average between 6 and 10% for health. And so,
What do we? I didn't.
Ours is about 12%,
Yeah.
so it's clearly on the high
Yeah.
end. If there's, and Lisa,
12% year
yeah,
Yeah.
remember we go on a calendar year.
Yeah.
So we've actually already experienced the 12% increase in January and February of this year. And if there's any, I don't want to give any false hope, we did experience a very slight adjusted decrease during the year this year from NISHIP.
Okay, so actually, yes, correct. So the beginning of 2023 was actually a 14% increase. And then the rates did go down a little bit in July, mid-year. NISHIP did say this year they do not anticipate doing any adjustments. The adjustment that actually was done in July of 2023 had to do with their collective bargaining at the state, because again, NISHIP is New York State Civil Service, actually, insurance. So it had to do with their collective bargaining. So they said there will not be one. And then projecting, so what we know is half of next year's health insurance. We do not know what the 2025 rates will be. And so I looked at kind of a 3-year average of what the rates have changed.
I mean, all over the country, health insurance isn't going up 12% a year.
some
I
places.
mean, it goes up, but
Yeah.
it would be a crisis all over if it was double digit year after year.
Through your professional organization, Lisa, are your counterparts at districts that also use NISHIP, entering into discussion with NISHIP? Is there any opportunity for a coordinated conversation?
I haven't heard anything about that with Nice Ship. So we do know probably in our area, I think 3/4 of the, our area are with a different group. But I can reach out to those who are, with Nice Ship to see about it coordinated. It's such an enormous consortium, I mean, the other Blue Cross Blue Shield consortiums are usually BOCES based that we see. So, Swiss Chip, Putnam Northern Westchester, so it's a little smaller to kind of organize a group to, to look at change, but I'd be absolutely willing to reach out.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but our piece of this is going up, but so is the teachers and staff. They pay 25 or whatever percent
Yeah.
they're paying.
Correct.
It's a bigger and bigger number.
Yeah.
So it might not be that hard to negotiate a difference.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, it impacts everybody. That's true.
Like, it's interesting, we are battling and advocating at New York State level, and everybody's talking about the hit to foundation aid, which nets to us $288,000 bogey. And, we've been talking about that for months, and it's gotten the ear of our assemblymen and state representatives, and yet here's Nice Ship hitting us with a $3 million fee that nobody's talking about. I mean, there really ought to be more engagement. I think Nice Ship, by its name, is a New York State body. Am I right?
Yes, New York State, yes, correct. It falls under.
when they release this, do they release, like, here's where the money's going and here's why it's higher than it used to be?
Yes,
Is it a black box?
we actually pay we have 5 different rates that we pay. And the greatest increase we see is those associated with our, those individuals who also have Medicare. And that's the greatest increase, and it has to do, and it has to do with what is exactly being reimbursed through Medicare, because then once you're on Medicare, then the health insurance becomes secondary.
Yeah.
But, so that is actually the areas that we saw some of the greatest increases.
But just what I meant was, does the
In rate.
insurance group sort of explain their math to anybody that this is why it's going up? Do they have to go, in some industries, there's like, if you want a rate increase, you have to go before a board of some sort
I don't know.
and make the case that this is why you need the increase. I mean,
They do, I mean, there is.
people getting 12% more surgery? I mean, I'd just be curious.
Yes, I mean, they did.
Where the money goes.
Yes, no, I mean, it would be, I can certainly look more into it and see where exactly, like I said, I mean, I know the areas, I know the rates which have seen the greatest increase. And I know New York State also is getting less reimbursement from the federal government in terms of Medicare. And again, it's a New York State insurance, it's New York State's insurance. And but I could definitely get some information on that.
I'm just curious if they, when they release a number this big, that there has to be some explanation about why this is. We can just say it's the health insurance, but the health insurance people should say what's under the hood. Why is there this huge increase? After COVID. I mean, this is post-COVID. It's just like it seems bears some scrutiny.
We've analyzed the third-party review impact, right? New York State made a decision there, and we've analyzed that, and we know that we may have to make adjustments to our project plans under the bond because of that. But it's not $3 million impact to the district. We've done a lot of analysis based on mandates coming from New York State, but here's one. It's not a mandate from New York State, but a significant increase that we're kind of oblivious to. We really ought to find out what's driving it. And I know that there are alternatives. I know how difficult it is to switch, but we should start to look at those again.
I've started to gather some data just because, again, we talked about that's something the finance committee will be looking at. So I have begun to gather data, but it's, again, not a simple switch.
Just, I feel like we're going to be here all day Saturday, right? And we're going to be looking at, $2,000 here, $17,000 there. And in the back of my mind, I'm going to be thinking like just 3 million just came and hit us. And, everything else sort of pales in significance to it.
I think we all share the feeling, and we know we can start to look into things. There's nothing that's going to change within this budget cycle.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
And I think it's the national and state problem. Again, looking at state averages of health insurance increase, the average in New York State is 14%, in Vermont 12%, Maine 16%. So those are just the average across all the premiums in the state. So it's a problem. And unfortunately, we have, I don't want to go down a huge political rabbit hole, but, our insurance companies are not non-for-profit entities. So there's value to them in.
Actually, is NISHIP, is NISHIP a for-profit?
It's a consortium, and the insurances that they use can be.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, then that definitely has to be looked at. Which insurances they're using, there are other choices they can do. I mean,
Yeah, well,
We're just a little cog in the machine.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm prepared to go on a hunger strike until the rest of tomorrow.
Great. Well, thank you again for that. I don't know if anyone else has any other.
I don't want to belittle all the other great work that's gone into this. It
I
just feels to me
think
that
we
one is
all
so
have
large.
that. Yep.
It's worthy of some high-level
Frustrating.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the work that's gone into the budget and that we're able to maintain our programming and support our students. A question that has formed that is, I think, in the same category of maybe just a request for information or for some additional context, and I'm going to try to ask the question in the abstract for the time being, but it relates to payment in lieu of taxes, pilot agreements that I know are very seriously affecting some of our neighboring districts. And I know that for a while now, New York State School Board Association and WestPUT and LHEC have been engaged in advocacy efforts to raise awareness about the effect of pilot agreements on the levy. And my understanding is that with exemptions that recently our board has had the opportunity to talk about, it's in our purview, surprisingly. Nevertheless, it's been in our purview to make decisions about exemptions for different populations. But by contrast, we really don't have a role with respect to pilot agreements. It's a courtesy to be notified, but we're not decision makers. We have no seat at the table, is my understanding. But nevertheless, I think it does have an impact, sometimes minimal, sometimes pretty significant, on the levy. And so this might be a conversation for the future, maybe related to our proposed budget, but maybe more appropriately for when we adopt the tax levy in the summer. I'm not really sure, but I'm just looking to better understand how this affects our levy and our entire community. Because while we don't have a seat at the table and we're not decision makers, my understanding is that the levy shifts, even if somewhat imperceptibly, depending on the size of the pilot. But I think we should really be aware, because if pilots become more prominent in our school district, then it will have an impact. So I think we want to be transparent about what's happening, and our board should be knowledgeable about the different sides of the issue.
We'll gather some information and come
Thank
back to
you.
with it.
You know it's not in our purview, within whose purview is it, the town?
Yes, no, it's what's called the IDA, the Industrial Development Agency. And don't ask me any follow-up questions. But I do think that's a conversation between the town, the municipality, and the IDA.
Anyone? We keep moving and have Nora join us.
I had a couple of just broad questions.
Yep.
As we're moving into taking on more debt, is this something that we would expect to see in the budget at this rate every year of kind of taking the debt service, or how do we think about that this year versus future
Yeah.
years?
Lisa, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, so the plan has always been to somewhat, the debt will increase again next year. And then once we submit our final cost reports for our projects, then the building aid will start to flow. So right now, we're in a place where our building aid is decreasing because our old debt fell off. So the building aid is decreasing based on those old projects. Again, they're based on 15-year amortization rate, the building aid. So right now, we're in this place where we have building aid decreasing, our debt increasing, but in a couple years, then we'll see our building aid increase again.
Okay.
So then it will level off.
But for the next year or two, it'll increase.
It will increase, exactly.
And with the propositions, the language that we included in them for the option of buying electric, hybrid, or gas, is that just to have the flexibility given the availability of vehicles like in the marketplace?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we wanted to have the flexibility, you know, I think everyone is aware that the state's mandate is in place that by, I think, 2035, all vehicles have to be emission-free. So we're certainly moving in the direction of, and when we can, we want to buy the electric vehicles. It's not a simple process. Cost is a barrier, but there are now grants becoming increasingly available. But also we have to get this feasibility study conducted to be sure that we add the electric vehicles in the most appropriate way and have the infrastructure in place to support them, which there's lots of questions about also. And in the meantime, we have some aging fleet. So we don't want to be left in a situation where we don't have the vehicles that we need. The board knows that we've purchased one electric vehicle. It took a year and a half or so, I think, to actually get it here. And so, again, the intent is, we know that's the direction to be moving in, and we want to be moving in that direction. We just don't want to have ourselves boxed in to not have any options depending on what might happen.
Would it, okay, just one follow-up on that. Would it ever become a better proposition for us to have, instead of purchasing our own vehicles, to follow the lead of other districts around us that use bus companies? I know you've looked at that, but I couldn't remember the answer. Why we keep buying them versus. You
mean go to, well, if you're talking about going to outside transportation as a vendor, that's a big question. It's more than just about the purchase of the vehicles, right? So that's another negotiated item. I will say at the moment, from what I'm hearing from other superintendents, there are some challenges that are being faced by those districts who are working only with outside vendors, because they're now receiving bids from those vendors who have to go through the same electrification process. So they want to pass the costs along to the districts. So it's not necessary. So I think we might actually see some advantages in having the fleet belong to us. And in addition, the driver shortage exists in that private vendor world just as it does with us also. And so a lot of the same challenges are there. And in some cases, I'm hearing there are some more challenges when you're working with an outside group. So
we studied this on the finance committee 5 or 6 years ago, and maybe it's time to look at it again. But there were a couple of other influencing factors. One was community sentiment. I think people in the community felt very strongly that they, I'm sure Nora can speak to this, that they enjoy having the same bus driver. They know the bus driver. They know they work for the school. There's a sense of sort of community associated with that. And the other big issue, which surprised me at the time, is that there's a reality that once you switch, you almost can never go back. You can't now purchase 100 buses in a school bus. So typically what they do is you give your fleet of buses to the outsourced company. And now if you ever choose to go back, you're like, where are we going to get 100 buses from? And it's a complete barrier for going back. And so even though we did identify that there was some savings associated with it, between community sentiment, the issues that you just raised, at the time we weren't thinking about EVs, but they're real issues. And the fact that you can never go back, you can never change your mind. I think that they were some of the drivers.
Controlling your own destiny.
Helpful.
Yeah. You're controlling the hiring and training of your staff, and the feeling that your staff understands that they're valued and they're an important part of the school community. Very different when they're an employee of the district versus a employee of a vendor. And that was very clearly expressed to us when we did that research.
Can I just ask one other question?
Please.
So last year, our demographer reported an uptick and we saw a downtick. And this year, they're reporting an uptick, and it looks like we're planning for maybe a downtick in spite of an uptick. I guess my question is, what data is the demographer using to come up with their numbers? And if we're beginning to mistrust them, like, are they within the plus or minus confidence rate? And maybe we're not mistrusting them, but if they're saying the enrollment will go up and we're continuing to see a downward trend, is there some adjustment we can make? Is there some?
I don't want to give the impression that we're mistrusting.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
That's okay. I did point out the places where things proved differently than the demographer indicated, but I think, to be fair, it was largely in the kindergarten area, which we always say caution is a really difficult place to project. I think it's overall the numbers are generally pretty accurate from the demographer.
I think sometimes also, and we've talked about this a little bit, in cabinet, looking at the live births in the area in certain years, but then trying to project out of those live births, what families are possibly holding kids back another year, who's coming to kindergarten and what age. Oh, sure. So I think some of that is difficult projection.
It's not simple, but
No.
that's what they do.
Yeah,
for a living.
yeah, fair. Yeah.
And then with our contingency positions in the last couple of years, have we been using them every year? All four of the ones that we've been allocated?
Not
the last couple of years?
necessarily, and I'm glad you asked the question. So we've talked about this a lot, thinking that the question would come to us. So when we talk about these four contingency positions, for us is actually it's a budget item with a certain dollar amount attached to it. So if you think back to the last year, we started with those four positions, but before the year began, we removed the kindergarten teacher because we didn't need that section. So that funding got folded into that same allotment, and then we removed the ENL teacher, or actually we never hired an ENL teacher because that need never arose. So now instead of equivalent of four, we really had the equivalent of six positions in terms of funds available. We certainly then did use the equivalent of one FTE when we added that TSP program during the year, and we've estimated that the other pieces of contingency that we use are often more in fractional positions when we need an extra section of math in high school and an extra section of social studies. We've calculated, we think about the equivalent of about one more position was used. So about two positions we used in the current year. And the truth is we had more funds than that available because of the other positions that we didn't fill. So we don't have I don't have an average beyond that over prior years, but
It's about the same.
it generally is
Yeah,
around
since my
that?
time, it's been about the same.
About
Yeah.
two?
Yeah.
Okay.
As we look ahead this year, though, we've tightened things in other places, including in that kindergarten projection, and so I think, again, we're open to having discussions over the next few weeks, but we'll feel better if there are four in there as we start the coming year, as we look towards the coming year. Anything else?
Nope.
So we're going to invite Nora to come up. And Lisa, you want to help us know where we turn in the books?
Yellow pages?
Yellow pages. Thanks.
Yeah, yellow for us.
Easier if you go to the back and go
No, I was.
You know what my
So
name is?
go all the way to the end, and
Like
not all the way to that
Yeah.
end, but to the
Saying.
colored page section, go to the end and then flip forward, you'll get the, it's green and then yellow if you go from back to front.
Yes,
Oh.
there's just a couple pages there between green and, or excuse me, between blue and green. There's a couple yellow pages there.
So hi, and thank you all for your support, the transportation team. These two yellow pages have to do with, the first page has to do with our staff, which in the office, there are 4 office staff, including myself, and an assistant supervisor, a head bus driver, and a dispatcher. We have 55 6-hour drivers. We have now 13, we're budgeting for 13 bus monitors. In the top also reflects, budget codes reflect contract services, the bus driver training, the weather advisory, routing, as you could tell, all those below it, but I just wanted to just tell you what some of the things are, like contract services is our coach buses, our NICOMCO, it's the radios that we use to communicate with our drivers. It is Scion and 24/7, which we use inside our buses for camera systems. It is work that I need to get done on those things to have NICOMCO come in. It also includes the coach buses. And so far this year, we are up to about 20,000 in coach bus fees for overnights, for wrestling, robotics, business leaders, science research, and so forth. It also includes the DOT fees and waste oil removal. Bus parts supply are the supplies that we use to keep all our buses running, because we do our own work at the Katona Elementary School. And our mechanics, there are 6 mechanics and 1 head mechanic, do a really excellent job in keeping our buses going. We have about a 98% DOT score, which is really, really good. Let's see. We also take care of our O&M vehicles, not just our buses, but also the O&M vehicles. The second page, on the first page, you're going to see a decrease of 89,000, a little over 89,000. I think that probably has to do with, we went down from 56, 55 6-hour, but then we went up to 13 bus attendants. On the next page, it is associated with our garage and what we do in our garage. Like I said, we have 6 mechanics and 1 head mechanic. Each of our buses are inspected by the New York State DOT inspector twice a year. We have about 750,000 miles that we log each year. And that budget for the 5530 is going to increase by 6,071, making the overall budget to budget decrease of 82,925.
Between 5510 and 5530 combined.
Thank you.
How
Thank
is
you,
there
Laura.
nearly 100,000 decrease in the bus van driver?
Pardon me?
The bus van driver slot, is a nearly $100,000 decrease?
It is, like Nora mentioned, is 1 driver going from 56 to 55, in addition to the way we had budgeted for hourly drivers, as well as the subs drivers, as well as regular 55 drivers. I looked at that and said, looked at expenses and everything and said, basically what I said is if we're going to be using more sub drivers, then we wouldn't use as many drivers, so I just kind of made some adjustments there based on prior expenses.
The decrease in gas diesel, is that because we have an electric vehicle or
No.
pricing?
Price.
No, I mean, I
Pricing
think
going
it would
down?
have, I mean, that one fluctuates each year and it's really hard to measure. But, going from 3-tier to 2-tier, I've seen a drop in mileage that way.
Okay.
And then adding it up, basing on like a 6 years of what our average prices are, we just came up with a number.
Okay.
So I thought that's not an offset, that 20,000 on the supply line, offsetting the 20,000 on the diesel line. I just assumed that something moved from.
I think
one
it's just
line
a
to another.
coincidence.
Yeah, it's just a
Okay.
coincidence.
Yeah.
Kind of a
Yeah, I
rough
thought to my, I
estimate.
saw it too. I thought, oh, look,
Yeah,
why
yeah,
not?
okay.
But
Okay.
Just with respect to the bus parts and equipment and thinking about the introduction of the new EV bus to our fleet, would you be able to just share some preliminary observations related to, time off the road compared to our non-EV buses and,
Lisa did,
expenses for repairs on the EV bus compared to the average next most expensive bus, that kind of thing?
really hard. The electric bus has only been on the road 25 days. And it's been off the road or air door, a leak in the coolant. And then when it goes up to the shop in Poughkeepsie, they don't have the parts to replace it. So it sits there for a while. So I don't have data. I mean, Lisa has asked me for it. I just don't have data for 25 days.
Thank you.
It's also not a valid sample set, right?
Yeah.
One bus.
Right.
I don't think we can extrapolate from our experience with one bus and sort of think that on future purchases of EVs.
Right. I would agree. Nora, it's going up to Poughkeepsie because that's where it came from, because that's where the
That's
dealer
where
is.
the dealership is, the
Yes.
Toyota, Thomas, that's where it is. And we drive it up there and
It doesn't mean, though, that as we increase and have more EVs here, that if and when we need to repair them, we wouldn't be able to do those repairs here in-house in some cases. That would eventually become the plan, we would think, at some point.
It's hard to answer that question because what kind of repairs would an electric bus need? We're not going to do oil changes. We're not going to do, I don't really know. But maybe if we went with a different company, it wouldn't be as far as Poughkeepsie.
Okay.
Typically, EVs require far less maintenance than internal combustion engines.
That's what they tell me.
Well, it's been borne out. I mean, maybe not for school buses, I don't know.
Maybe not for
And
school
my thinking
buses.
is that the powertrain is built by a different company than the bus, and then the pieces maybe don't meld together because it's in its infancy.
Right.
I think as time passes by, and it's been a couple of years since we purchased that bus, things are probably going to improve, would be my expectation.
Let's hope.
We don't have a choice is the bottom line, but in my opinion, because of the delay, it took a year and a half to get the bus in-house last time. We should be thinking about advancing our purchases rather than delaying them. But that's just my opinion. In any event,
I don't share that opinion. Okay.
No, I think it's important. I think it is important for future propositions because we're asking our community to spend a lot of money on these EV buses for very good reasons and for reasons that also support our learning commitment and our vision for our future citizens and stewards of the earth. But we're in a tight spot because, a mandate is a mandate. And even if this mandate is, appeals to our sensibilities, it is a rush to adopt technology in its infancy that is super expensive and not effective in transporting kids to school at the moment. So I think that's just something to be aware of and to keep our eye on. We have no choice at the moment, but we do have opportunities to continue to advocate and raise awareness around the feasibility or lack thereof of achieving the mandate and to ask for help. And I do think NYSERDA is being asked to help.
It's an amazing problem for our students to be watching unfold because I hear legitimacy in all the points being made. We have to make this transition. The state's mandated it. It's the appropriate transition to make. I agree the technology is only going to get better. And from Nora's perspective right now, it's not great. Right. And her responsibility is get the kids to school safely and on time every day. And we're seeing all these different needs come and butt up against each other. And there's just not an easy answer right now. And this is the discussion in school districts all around the state. Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And maybe a lemon.
So we're going to keep moving forward in what we feel is a responsible way to all of those different needs,
Yeah.
So.
Thank you for the insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nora, can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
I really appreciate what was said earlier about knowing the drivers and the drivers being part of the community and the same every year for kids and how the bus is the time the students start their days and also end their days. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little more about the training that's offered for the drivers and also for the monitors and also a little more about what the roles of the monitors are and how it's decided where they go.
Sure. We have certain mandated trainings that we have to do yearly. We just had one of our refreshers on the 16th of February, in which we talk about what the state education department wants us to talk about with our drivers. As for behind the wheel training, most of our drivers come as CDLs already. I have noticed that I had to train some, and it's time consuming, but it's worth it because I want a certain type of driver that cares and that's conscientious and that really loves being with the kids. So the training is ongoing. I watch videos, I try to hop on buses, I try to be as helpful as I can, and we all work together. I think we've fostered a really good environment down there where if one driver is in trouble and they radio and there's somebody that's available, they'll go and try to help out. I had a driver holding a wire so another bus can go underneath it. I mean, I think we have a really great team and we go above and beyond.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I was just
the
curious.
monitors, I'm sorry, the monitors, there's a basic course that all monitors need to have, right? This basic course is just a 10-hour course, but each year they also have more training as the mandated by state education department. they also have a physical performance that they have to pass too. And how we decide like a monitor on a bus, sometimes, I mean, most of the time we make really good decisions. Sometimes we have to rethink it and change it because it's just not a good connection with the monitor and the student that we're transporting.
And I was just curious if there's any collaboration with, and I know the primary role is to get the students to school safely and to be safe drivers, but I also really like hearing that you have drivers that want to be with the kids, that like care about that.
Yeah.
I mean, that adds safety to it too. But just wondering if there's opportunities or if there is something that exists around thinking about how to export or how to kind of have that cross collaboration between the culture that's being created in the school and the culture on the bus, so that they're kind of both, I know that in Chris Miller, like be your best, but how that kind of also plays out on the bus where there's not, the driver's driving, the driver's not having the capacity to do that, but how to make sure that kind of runs through from the beginning of the day till a student gets home.
I got to tell you, that's really hard. Because
Yeah.
a couple of years ago when we did the follow a fifth grader, do you remember that? I followed this one fifth grader who was great in KES, and I was about to pull my hair out at the end of the day because it was just constant structure. Okay, walk this way, goes quiet, and then when you get in the bus, I could see where they just want to let loose, you know? And it's really hard to manage the number of kids with these seats, and the seats are high, right? So if somebody's saying something about somebody else, the driver's not necessarily going to hear it 32 feet in front, you know? So I'm happy that we're going to get 3 monitors so I could really help some of the drivers, because all of our drivers are really good people, but some of them are just, they're not great. They need a little more help with student management. You know, they're soft, you know, not that they don't want to be militant, but they just need to kind of set a tone. And I have drivers that are so good about that. They, you know, they greet each child by name, by the second week, because they know it, they make communications, and then I have others that struggle. So I'm glad that we have added the 3 extras so I could, you know, put them on buses where drivers struggle.
Is there an opportunity for mentorship, the way we have mentorship opportunities for other staff members? I don't know, or a bus driver could mentor another bus driver.
Yeah, maybe.
Nora, do we have much turnover with the bus drivers?
No, we don't. But what I find is that I haven't gotten to replace the ones that have left. You know, a lot of them get offered sign-on bonuses, or sometimes it's just really hard for people to make a change. But once they come on, they usually stay. Yeah.
I do want to point out, when the board looks at the salary lines that we called out a few minutes ago, that the actual expenditures for the last few years were lower than what was budgeted, and that's directly because of the driver shortage.
Right.
Nora's managed that by, in some cases, consolidating some routes.
Right.
But Nora herself also drives often for us,
I
which
do.
we really appreciate, and I want the board to be
I
aware of that.
actually like the driving. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just say one last thing. I'm really, really hoping that this is some Irish soda bread in the bag.
It's Irish soda bread, but I didn't make it. Salinger's Orchard makes it,
Oh, I
and
love
it's the
Salinger's
best.
bread.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nora.
So I think now we can go back to pink page 1. What's that? Oh, we can, I'm sorry, yellow page 3.
Where are we going?
Yellow page 3 is just,
Yellow page 3, sorry.
yes.
The last yellow.
Yellow 3.
Quickly speak to it.
Overtime, just overtime.
It's just overtime that has to do with our community service, and it specifically has to do with building use. So it's just for, associated with anyone using the building who's outside of, you know, KLS.
If somebody uses our building, we have to afterwards clean up a little bit.
Yeah, we have to clean up afterwards, yes.
And it's flat, it's flat.
There's no change.
There's no changes there.
Now we're going to turn to the pink pages. And start at the beginning?
Starts at the beginning.
Start at the beginning.
On McGilla.
So we'll start with pink page 1, and this is the page that is relative to the Board of Education's budget. Overall, you can see in the lower right-hand corner that there is a $1,650 increase. The top part of the page is associated with any personnel associated with the Board of Education, specifically the video recording of each meeting each week. The bottom half of the page, you will see that there is just actually, you will see this over again, talking about insurance, sorry, but our nicer insurance companies informed us just recently that there's a 12 to 16% projected increase on our liability insurance. So that increase there you'll see is actually based on actual expense versus it's not budget to budget, but I did based on expense. And the decrease you'll see in BOE services just has to do with because we used to have our videos, the board meeting videos housed at BOCES, and now they're housed on YouTube. So that's just no longer have that expense. Are there any questions on this page? Okay.
May I just offer one comment on that?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that that was the cause of the budget reduction, and I'm glad to see the reduction. That's great, but I can't help but also point out that there are costs, not dollar amount costs, but costs associated with putting our content on YouTube. And, you know, this is offset by ads that we all watch, or anybody watches when they watch our board meetings. So thank you to all the advertisers for sponsoring our school board meetings and all of the other content we put on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I think page 2 is associated with cost relative to the district clerk. Overall, you can see the budget for the district clerk portion of our expenditures is projected to increase by $5,200. Top half of the page is associated with salary of the district clerk, as well as a stipend for an assistant district clerk as a backup. On the lower portion of the page, you can see the funds are budgeted for traveling to conferences as well as supplies for the district clerk's office. Any questions on this page? Pink page 3 is associated with costs relative to the annual district election and budget vote. Overall, you can see the budget for the annual vote is projected to increase by $1,400. The top half of the page is associated with election inspectors who would be paid out of a salary code, but since the majority of them are paid out of a 400 code and receive 1099s, that's why you do not see really anything there. On the lower portion of the page, you can also see funds associated with contract services, such as the bold election registration system for the software and the databases associated with elections, postcards that go out to residents for voting, and as well as advertising, legal notices, et cetera, Scantron ballots. And that's in contract services. The 408 code is for advertising required for legal notices. And there's just a little slight decrease based on actual expenses. The increase in the contract services is due to the estimate costs of using, actually, so there's a little flip there you'll see between BOCES is not really going up that much, and there's an increase in contract services, and that's because we had been using BOCES to print our budget newsletters, but they are no longer able to supply that service to us. So we are now going to be using a contract service for that. So that's the increase there in the contract service line. Any questions?
Page 4?
Yes.
Page 4 represents the expenses for the office of the superintendent, and on the top half of the page, you see salaries reflected for the superintendent and the executive assistant in the superintendent's office, and you see a projected increase there of just over $9,000. The bottom half of the page shows other expenses running of the office in equipment, contract services. In this case, contract services are things like consultants that we might use to bring in for professional learning, as well as things like our food service vendor, Aramark. Travel conference mileage includes everything, including membership and professional dues for the associations that the superintendent might belong to. And then supplies, which can be supplies not just for the superintendent's office, but for the district office as a whole, and an overall reduction of $500 in the supplies in the bottom half of that page. So the overall page increases by $8,627.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Are there any initial trainings and conferences that a new superintendent would need that are above and beyond anything that's in the regular budget? I mean, I would think the superintendent probably wants to spend a lot of time in district in their first year, but do we feel comfortable that that will meet whatever needs they might have? Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking that question. It's a good question.
Yeah.
Are we ready for the next page? Pink page 5. Pink page 5 is associated with the cost relative to the operations of the business office. Overall, you can see the budget for the operations of the business office is projected to increase by $55,709. The top half of the page is associated with salary for the assistant superintendent for business, the school business administrator, payroll and benefits clerk, bookkeeper, accounts payable clerk, payroll support / accounts payable clerk, as well as 0.2 of a secretary who is shared between the assistant superintendent for business and the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. On the lower portion of this page, you'll see funds associated with equipment, contract services, travel, conference attendance, and supplies. On the lower portion of the page, contract services include check printing software, subscriptions, appraisal updates, demographic updates, 403B administrative compliance, and funds for our financial advisors. Contract services and copiers include funds related to copy machines at the district office, the maintenance for those contracts, as well as for our check writer, and fees for additional copies outside the maintenance agreement. Travel and conferencing line includes fees for attendance of various conferences, workshops, and webinars to ensure our office staff are properly trained on all related business operations matters. Actually, also in addition is our membership, the business office membership to the Association of School Business Officials, and they just voted, then they are increasing their rates. It's an institutional membership, and so that those rates are going up, so that's an increase that you see there. As far as BOCES line includes subscriptions to state aid planning. And this year, you'll actually see a decrease between contract services and then increase in BOCES. And that is because prior we had contracted our asset management system directly from the company. And now we actually go through BOCES. We use the same system, AssetWorks. We go through BOCES, but that also provides us better support on the use of the system, as well as support in terms of data entry into the system. And finally, on this page, you will see the line for fiscal agent fees for bonds, and that is specific to when we go out for bonds, the additional fees that are associated with going out to Moody's, having our credit rating redone, and things like this, anything associated with that. So any questions on this page?
Lisa, you mentioned something about check printing, and I was wondering if those costs are, if there's how many checks we still print with direct payments and and like also even to vendors, like is that changing to electronic payments at some point?
So as far as all of our payroll is direct deposit, so there's minimal to no checks being printed there, but our accounts payable is primarily still paper checks. We do reimbursement to retirees. Our Medicare and our Medicare reimbursements are done through ACH as well. And, there are certain of our, invoices that we do through ACH right now, but we still are primarily in accounts payable at paper check. But that's something we will eventually look to move towards. We just want to make sure we have the proper securities in place before doing that.
Is there like a timeline for that transition?
Not right now, no, no.
Lisa, just a quick question, but not really specific to this page, but this page drew my attention to it. So the top halves of these pages are related to salary increases primarily. And at the beginning of the meeting tonight, we talked about the large increases and we talked a little bit about health insurance, but the second largest was contractual obligations, we called it, which in my mind, I think of that as sort of salaries overall that were contractually obligated. Does that $1 million increase, was it roughly a little less than $1 million? Is that including all of the administrative items we're seeing here at the top half of the page?
Yes.
So those are in that 1 million that we already talked about earlier today?
Yes, it's all.
You added them all together.
All
Yeah,
contractual
I just wanna make sure I'm
obligations,
clear on that.
collective bargaining units, those are not aligned with collective bargaining.
We've already
units.
talked about these items at the summary level.
Yeah.
So all of these, I just want to make sure that administrative salary increases are also contractual obligations. That's the category. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions on page 5, pink page 5? And we'll move on to pink page 6, which is auditing. And the budget for auditing service is projected to increase by $2,552. And this is simply due to the contractual increases for those of our auditors who we are with, multi-year, went out for an RFP and we have, multi-year, year-to-year contracts, but, it's a 5-year RFP. So that is just the increases that were proposed in the RFP. So, and I think, each of them are $1,000, so. And just a reminder, our claims auditor comes to the district 1 time per week to review every disbursement before it leaves the district. The claims auditor serves as a final checkpoint before disbursements are sent out. The claims auditor reviews all supporting documentation and any relevant bids to ensure the vendors are paid in accordance with the agreement and terms. You may recall last year we went out for, actually it was 2 years ago, for the RFP for claim services. And so the increase in the line is actually maxed, it's capped at 2%. So that's just a part of that. The internal auditor conducts the annual risk and works with the school district audit committee to identify areas of audit to be conducted at least once a year. The internal auditor will review all financial policies and procedures, practices and tests and internal controls. We did go out for RFP for that last year, and that is for 5 years. The external auditor reviews the district annual financial statements and determines whether the annual statement is presently fairly and is accurate representation of the district's financial position. And that we went out for that RFP a couple years ago. And again, that's for 5 years. So is there any questions about auditing? Page 6. Okay. We'll move on to page 7, which is our district treasurer. And that this is a budget page associated with the costs relative to the district treasurer. The total budget for the district treasurer portion of our expenditures are projected to increase by $2,734. And again, that is just due to primarily anything associated with salary for a district treasurer, as just minimal increases to travel and conferences, just more related to just CPI type changes. So, are there any questions about that page? Pink page 8 is associated with the cost relative to our district purchasing agent. Overall, you see an increase of $5,461 to this budget. The top half of the page has to do with salary of the purchasing agent as well as overtime, and that overtime is budgeted for the large volume of purchasing that's conducted during the summer months. It was actually projected, it was increased for next year just based on knowing that there's going to be additional bidding and purchasing responsibilities due to the bond work. On the lower portion of the page, you can see funds associated with contract services, advertising, legal notices, advertising of bids, in district mileage, as well as any cooperative bids that we belong to, supplies and reference material. Any questions on pink page 8? Okay. Let's see. Pink page 9 is associated with the cost relative to legal representation. And this area of the budget is projected to increase by $22,000. It can be a difficult function to prepare. We do have one firm that's under retainer, so that is, easier, obviously to budget for. We don't know the cost yet, but we can do a reasonable projection. And but other fees and reimbursable attorneys, these are utilized to pay for non-retainer matters, excluding special education matters, but labor matters which may result in disciplinary hearings or attendance at superintendent's disciplinary hearings are examples of items which would be billable. To budget for these items, we just look at budget history and current expenses. Attorney fees, bond counsel, specific counsel represents the Board of Education when they refinance or borrow funds, for example. And then there's the attorney fees for CSE litigation. And these are specialized attorneys that represent the district on the Committee on Special Education Matters. The combined monthly fees for special education litigation over the past 18 months, giving pending litigation and such. We have actually kept that flat, but we've kept that flat based on what we've seen though.
Lisa, just one question on that page, that 20,000. I'm trying to understand why we would bump up the non-retainer attorneys' fees, I think you said for disciplinary hearings and so forth. Is it because the 2023 actual came in at about 90,000?
It did, yes. And also quite a bit of that was, it's actually related to bidding and changes that we've done to our process and procedures. Some of that is also related to that, different changes there. And so all these bids, all these contracts that we're starting to write for these new projects have to go to council. And so that is now going to be billable. It's not a part of the retainer. The performance bonds, all of these things have to be checked by council, so they are additional billable hours. It's not something that falls under the retainer.
Is that enough?
That helps.
Is that enough of an increase?
Yes, it should, yes.
Percentage-wise, it's a big jump, right? And that's why I'm looking at it. It went from 70 to 90.
Yes, yes.
Right, so it's up, what is that? What is that?
23%.
Yeah, 20-something percent, it's high.
But the prior year expense was
Actually, almost
92.
28%.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thanks, let's go.
You're welcome.
28%, sorry. Did it in my head.
Just
Yeah.
a question on the CSE litigation. Are those funds just kind of variable per what comes up in the district? Is there a retainer within that?
It is not retainer. No, there's not retainer. It is billable hours because it's just more fluctuating area of legal counsel.
Okay to go on? Okay. I have page 10, and it represents the Office of Human Resources. At the top half of the page, there's contractually obligated increases of 27,886, and that represents myself, personnel assistant, and a secretary to school administrator. We're projected to be fully staffed, so I'm very much appreciative of that. Jumping down to the bottom half of the page, you'll see the contract service of 16,000, and that represents our growing partnership and relationship with RBT and other consultants for instructional leadership for our entire admin council. Advertising and legal notices, you'll see is a slight reduction, and that's just based on our usage, and also some tinkering with Indeed and finding other more efficient ways to advertise for positions. You'll see an increase in the travel and conference. That's not to attend more travel and conference. That just has to do with the increasing rates associated with whether it's hotels for the rates of the conferences and increased dues of professional organizations. There's also an increase there for materials and supplies. As I mentioned, I'm fortunate enough to be fully staffed in HR, which in previous years we've had kind of gone back and forth between fully staffed, and that number just represents some of the needs and inflation as well that we need for supplies. In all, the subtotal is 31,002 for the Office of HR.
Okay. And we'll go to page 11. Is there any questions? I'm sorry about the Office of HR. No. On pink page 11, 1460, our records management, there is just a slight increase, and that just has to do with the cost associated with that BOE service for records management. And that is just dealing with digitizing any of our documents, some of our documentation. Any questions on that? And Neil, I think you have the last page of the night.
Back to me. Yeah, back to me for pink page 12, which represents the public information assistant. And as some of you know, this position was previously contracted through BOCES, and it was until recently that this title came into our Katona-Lewisboro support staff. You see the change in budget there, just under $12,000. Feel very fortunate to have this title within the Katona-Lewisboro support staff association. So thank you very much for that. The bottom half of the page there, that $7,000 contract services represents the possibilities of some in-house publications and probably some hard copy communication to the community that we're still considering. Travel and conference at $850, a reduction in the BOCES services with a grand total there of $15,490.
There are no questions, and I think that concludes this
That takes us to
portion.
the end of what we were planning to get through for this evening. If we'll take a moment to just ask one more time if there's anything else that we've gone over tonight that you would like us to try to get some more information on for Saturday. If not, we've made note of the questions that you've asked so far, and we'll come back to you with some information on Saturday, and then periodically on the day on Saturday, we'll ask for your questions again, and we'll make sure that we're getting down all the questions that you're looking for answers to. Yes?
Thank you again, everyone, for
you.
all your work.
Thank you.
And we look forward to
Thank you.
hearing more on Saturday. We're now at item 9.01, which is the opportunity for public comment. I am aware that Rachel Barnett is here to speak. Public comment is an opportunity for you to provide us feedback on anything that's on the budget or on the agenda. And Rachel, just for your clarification, you have 3 minutes. And we
Okay, I'll make
won't
this quick.
respond. We're here to listen and hear your feedback and certainly take it into consideration, and may come up in a further discussion about the budget.
Sure. Hello.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. It's late, so I'm going to try to make this quick. You may recognize me for my awesome dance moves of being Buddy. But I'm not here to talk about Buddy tonight. I have 2 sons, one who's an 8th grader, excelling really well, and one who's a 4th grader. I'm here to talk about the 4th grader in KES. He has 26 students in his class this year, and it's the largest amount of students out of anybody in the district. And so I've written everyone an email. There are a number of parents looking at this particular issue, and I'm just asking you to just monitor what's happening with the 4th grade class at KES specifically. So last year, when you look at the projections, there were projections of about 25 students in Meadow Pond, and Meadow Pond, which I think they used the contingency, got an extra section. And that brought them down to about 19 or 20 students. Increase Miller, they have 4 sections. I'm talking about the 4th grade class, and that brought them down to 19 and 20 students. And so there are a number of parents looking at this, and all we're asking for is relative fairness here. If there's going to be an extra section added in a 4th grade class in Meadow Pond, we're asking for the same to be happening in KES. Now, I can't change 4th grade, right? He has 26 students in his class. But what I am looking to is for the 5th grade class. And so I saw the projections, and, look, maybe it's coincidental, but I find it a little concerning that there was a large complex that's now been diverted to KES, right? And so we're all looking at that. And the projections that we just saw on page 20 was that Increase Miller and Meadow Pond in 5th grade next year are going to all increase. But the one place where there's not going to be some increase is this 4th grade going into 5th grade class in KES. They're miraculously going to have 3 less people, right? I don't know why the numbers showed. I would hope that it didn't have to do with a number of parents expressing concern about this particular class, and then all of a sudden, everybody else increased, but ours decreased. So I find it a little concerning. But at the end of the day, since my time is up, what matters are the...
You're just, you have 30 seconds.
Oh,
left.
30 seconds,
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, sorry.
okay, 30 seconds. Look, what matters is the actuals and that we're monitoring the situation. The 5th grade, even the space, they have 2 larger classrooms, but they have 1 smaller classroom. We cannot be in a situation where there has to be 26 kids in a small classroom. And I just want to also highlight with these particular 4th grade class, which we've talked to Christy about this, is an unusual class in the sense that they had to go when it was COVID through 1st grade. So we're dealing with kids who had a different sort of elementary school experience and deserves the very best for their 5th grade class. And so just asking you to please just, watch out for this, because the actuaries are what really matter.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So that's the only person signed up to speak for public comment. So I'm going to close public comment. And we can move to item 11 and the consent agenda. I'm not aware that anyone has anything to pull out of the consent agenda. No. Someone like to make a motion to move the consent agenda? Moved by Lorraine, seconded by Bill R. All those in favor?
Aye.
7-0. There's no. We're at item 15.01, which is an opportunity for board dialogue. I don't know if there's any discussion that we wanted to have about anything tonight. We'll be together again on Saturday. So
We typically don't address people who spoke at the podium, but since it is the budget and since enrollment is on the budget, and we did just look at the class sizes, and the class sizes look like they're all within our goals for sure, including that one. It is curious that it's increasing by 3 students year over year, and I obviously don't know the details of all those numbers. But when we talk about the contingency positions, and isn't it the case that if the numbers increase beyond the goal, that we use some of those 4 contingency positions that we spoke to fill that gap? And I know there's some very awkward numbers. We talk about this every year, where there's awkward numbers that you end up with a very small class or a relatively large class. I also know that the board has established goals that I think we're within all of the goals, but it is true that some classes are larger just by chance than others. So we'll keep an eye on it, as we always do, right? Yep. And as we get to know the full enrollment numbers, we'll make adjustments as necessary, and that's what we've done in the past.
Yep. Thank you, Rory.
okay, great. So as mentioned, we'll be together on Saturday, but I'm just going to go through future meetings because we have a lot. So tomorrow morning, the Policy Committee will be meeting at 9 a.m. in the district office. Then Saturday, we'll be here at 8:30 for a continuation of our budget review. We have a Finance Committee meeting on Tuesday, February 27th at 7 p.m. in the district office. We have a Sustainability Committee meeting on Friday, March 1st at 8:15 in the district office. And we have another board meeting scheduled for March 7th at 7:30 p.m. here in the high school, an additional meeting again on March 14th here in the high school. And I don't know if we have more. Oh, we have more. We have another Finance Committee meeting in March on Wednesday, March 20th. We have another Board of Education meeting on March 21st at 7:30 p.m. here. And finally, on March 22nd at 9 a.m. in the district office, we have a Policy Committee meeting. That's it. Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn? Motion by Rory, seconded by Bill R. All those in favor?
Aye.
7-0. Thank you. We'll see you on Saturday.